do than listen to this kindergarten. Are we finished here?
No, we ain't finished here, lady. Sit down.
What else do you want? No! Fire.
Out of the way, lady.
No. I amputated the infected area. I think I caught it in time.
Yeah? But what if you didn't?
If I didn't, I'll shoot him myself.
Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live, and it is my honor and pleasure tonight to welcome our very special guest, who we all know as Sarah from 1985's Day of the Dead, Laurie Cardillo. Laurie, thank you so much for being here with us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. It's so good to be here. You have a great show. I hear so many great things about it, so it's always nice to meet fans through a great show, especially.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, let's just get right into it. You are a Pittsburgh native. How did you get drawn into the world of George Romero?
Well, it's kind of a long, convoluted story. I went to Carnegie Mellon University to study theater. And that was like I graduated CMU at 76. And my father, who was Bill Cardillo, Chili Billy, was in the original Night of the Living Dead. And he played himself, the announcer. And so my dad had this horror show in Pittsburgh. It was one of the first horror hosts in the whole country. And George used to always watch his show. And he came to my dad and said, "Hey, I have this little movie I'm making, Night of the Living Dead. I'd like you to be in." Well, it was called the Night of the Flesh Eaters then.
Oh.
And asked my dad to be in it. And so my dad, when it was filmed and it was in the can, my dad would constantly plug it. And Chiller Theater was the biggest show here in Pittsburgh in the 60s. It was in the 70s into the 80s. I mean, Greg Nicotero took my dad's backdrop and has it in his office, and he sits in front of a stool. He was such a big fan of my dad's. I mean, everybody that grew up in Pittsburgh in the 60s and 70s knows my dad. So George asked me to be in it, and kindly George always thanked my dad for his career whenever he could, and it was just wonderful. So anyway, fast forward many years later, because I went to that original showing of Night of the Living Dead when it was in Pittsburgh, and I was terrified. I hated horror movies. I was always afraid as a kid anyway. I didn't want to get extra, fear in me. So I remember standing out in the lobby the whole time. It was 50-some years ago. And so anyway, fast forward, I go to Carnegie Mellon, study theater, moved to New York, and I had a really nice career in New York. I did a lot of theater, television. I got on a soap opera right away, The Edge of Night, Ryan's Hope. Mm-hmm. And I was doing a play with this wonderful, great American playwright. His name was Craig Lucas. And George came to see, I hadn't seen George in all those years, and he came to see the play. This was in New York. I lived there many years. And the character that I played in Reckless was a character that was on stage the whole time. And it was a serious comedy, sort of tragedy. And so afterwards, he invited me out to dinner. We went out for old time's sake with my dad was not there. But anyway, he said, I've written this part. I would like you to play it. And I was just like that. I mean, wow, And George also went to Carnegie Mellon, so he knew that, you have a really good training when you go there. You learn to do all the classics, and, you really do theater. And I had already been on Broadway and all that. And so when he asked me to do it, yeah, that was just fabulous. But at the time, horror movies were not so as respected in my in my field. I mean, my agent was like, "Really?" I said, "Yes, it's a wonderful part. Read this part. It's fabulous female part." And so I did it, and grateful that I did, because it is a wonderful part and a wonderful script, and I was very honored to be a part of it.
Now, there are some contradictory stories out there. Did George write the role with you in mind, or did he write the role and then figured out that he wanted you to play it?
Well, he was writing it, and then he had another script that he was writing at the time, and then he wrote it for me as he was, as he was, creating the part.
Okay,
So,
okay, that clears that up. Now,
yeah,
was it?
yeah.
Oh, go on.
He asked me to, so I auditioned people with him. So I would read with other actors when they would audition for the part.
Okay, okay. Now, was it important, because you just mentioned this yourself, a leading female role back in the 80s? How important was it to you to make Sarah not the cliche horror type lead female character? Was it important to you to change the aspect of what women were looked at, especially in the horror genre back in the 80s?
Right. Well, I think that was to George's credit, and also the parts I would always play usually were leading lady types and strong females in a lot of the stuff that I did. My voice is low. I'm very tall, and I think that it just that's where it sat with me when I would read it, and so and it was very we created it together. And it was ahead of its time in a way, because I was not, like I said, I wasn't a big horror fan. Now I am. I've learned so much from the fans, and I love it now. And after a lot of psychoanalysis, I'm not as afraid anymore. So it was I just it was ahead of its time. I just knew that character. I didn't know a lot of horror movies, so I had nothing to not play it as, except the way we played it,
Being a horror fan now, are you proud that the horror genre is one of the top genres in both TV and film right now?
It's amazing. Yes, I'm very proud. I mean, we knew we had something special when we made Day of the Dead, and we're so disappointed that it didn't catch on then. And so to see that people have found it and are love it and study it. In fact, at Pitt, University of Pittsburgh, they have George's archives, and now they're gathering my father's archives, because he had an incredible career in television. So there's actually a studies of horror at the University of Pitt. And a lot of it involves George's movies, and so it's such a great genre. There's so much to it, so much good psychological stuff. Bettelheim did the fairy tales of children, the children's fairy tales, and these are not to be sloughed off. There is so much to them, and I learned that through the fans. The fans are so bright, especially I found with Day of the Dead. They are really knowledgeable, incredibly interesting, and smart people.
Absolutely. Now, I always tell my viewers that classics are not recognized as soon as the movie is released. History is the judge of what will become a classic. Day of the Dead is a classic. History has made its decision. It is a classic. Do you agree with that? That history and time will determine a movie's fate and where it ends up?
Yes, and in fact, that's very smart, John. I mean, I never thought of it that way, but absolutely. I mean, that's quite a thing. I mean, I never would have thought that.
Yeah.
It was 10, 20 years after, and then it started to pick up. Then there was always this debate: is this like Dawn of the Dead? It's not Dawn of the Dead. We don't like this movie. It's too dark. And then, it wasn't meant to be Dawn of the Dead, but which is a great movie, of course. But it was just kind of misunderstood, and I think as time went on, it got its due.
Absolutely.
I'm a photographer also, and my photography is very in-your-face kind of stuff. After in one of the wars, the Iraq War, I took photographs. I had the honor of going to Walter Reed, and because of Day of the Dead, actually. And I was able to take some photographs of the soldiers coming back. And that was a time when our president, it was President Bush, wouldn't let us see the caskets, of the soldiers coming back. And
I remember that.
Yeah, I was so pissed. And so I got these shots and got the soldiers' permission, and they were some of them were very difficult, but I was able to have them in a show. And it was quite controversial, but it was something that it had to be in your face. And that's why I like Day of the Dead. It was very in your face. That one scene you showed when Sarah chops the arm off and George takes the camera and goes right into it. I mean, to me, that was so brave of him to do, It wasn't like pornography or anything in a sense, but it was so real and so horrific. And I love truth in these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
George Romero has been known to make social commentary in all of his movies. Let's just single out Day of the Dead. In your opinion, what is the underlying message that George wanted the audience to know in regards to Day of the Dead?
Oh, I think there are a few messages. Of course, from my point of view as Sarah, the strong female character, it was about time that women were represented. I mean, that's the time of Alien. And of course, Alien was a big budget film and a wonderful film too, but we were like the lower budget art film kind of. And I was very proud to play that kind of a female that wasn't the victim all the time, which seemed to be the films before that. And I think just the desolate feeling of that things aren't so wonderful. Things aren't always so wonderful, and that it is dark. And do we really trust our government? And it was, and I think coming off of Dawn of the Dead, thank you, sorry. I think that, that was brave too, to sort of like flip. It wasn't funny. I mean, it wasn't, there was different kind of humor to it, but, to start, we came out of the Vietnam War and we just weren't as innocent in the 80s. Things were starting to turn. I mean, look at the way they are now. My goodness, there's so much good stuff being made around the what's happening in our country now. I think that there's so many wonderful horror films coming out because we know it now in our soul. And I think that George, in Day of the Dead, really started that bleakness,
Now he is recognized as a pioneer. Back then it was controversial what he was doing, but now he is getting the due that, and has been for a long time, that he deserved back in the 80s. But again, we go back to that history thing, and history is what determines pioneers like George Romero and so on. Now, moving on, since the role of Sarah was written with you in mind, I assume as an actor you did not have to do much prep for the role, or am I completely wrong?
Well, there's always prep, I mean, that's the training I come from. There's always a lot of work involved in figuring out many aspects of the character. I was worried, I remember, because I had never really, I've done a lot of television at that point, and as I said, really more theater, but I had never shot out of sequence or, never did a film before with that magnitude of, and the depth of a character like that. So for me, it was a totally new experience. So to build the character And I was worried that she was just sort of like a one tone in the beginning because she was holding it together really. And so I had to look for the moments where she lets her guard down and becomes actually probably a stronger person emotionally by breaking down and letting her true self come up. She was always on guard. So playing always on guard like that, I was concerned that there wasn't enough nuance to the character. But I think it all worked out.
I think it did too. And we saw Sarah's arc from the beginning of the film, just putting on the brave face and her relationship with Miguel, all the way to the very end, where you are the last one standing. You and the other two got away, and we are left to assume you guys live out the rest of your days on that island, which
Right.
is it's a great ending in my opinion. Now, you had some very intense scenes throughout the whole movie. Was it physically rough, just having to shoot some of those scenes?
Yes, it was. I was in good shape at that point, because I was in my early 30s and, we do all that stuff for theater, the dance, whatever, everything. You're always pretty good shape. And the cave was so grueling, I can't tell you. We all got sick. You could hear water dripping all the time. There was a place we would go into the mine, and it was some office space, but it was office space with rock walls. And then you go into the cave itself, which was just a door away, open a door, and there were 27 miles of lake in there, and just these little light bulbs. The way you see it is the way it was. I mean, they would store. I heard that they did store like some of the Beatles original tapes because the temperature was very consistent, and there was government stuff down there, and RVs where people would keep their RVs and their boats in there. But these lakes, they didn't want the guys to go off on the on those little go-karts or golf carts because if they would go really deep in there, they could go into one of these lakes. So we were all like pretty freaked out by that. But we got sick. All got so sick.
Yeah.
It was just brilliant. It was a long shoot. We shot for 3 months.
So it's true that the stories you did get physically ill, but you still pressed on with the shooting.
Oh, sure. We had a doctor on the set, and there was a flu. I just remember having the flu in the one scene where in the Ritz, when I'm back there talking, and Terry has this wonderful scene of, the tombstone and the whole talking what's back there. Yeah. And I had like 103 temperature. That was terrible. But, the show must go on. I mean, that's the way it goes. You break your leg, you still show up.
I totally get it. Now, was Day of the Dead, like all of George's movies, shot on location in Pittsburgh?
Well, it was in Wampum, Pennsylvania, which was about an hour and a half away from Pittsburgh. I lived in New York at the time, but my daughter was about she was like 7 months to a year. She learned to walk on the set. In fact, the exteriors were shot in Florida. All the things you see was at Bowman's Beach in right outside of Fort Lauderdale, in Sanibel. And so that was really nice. We went down there. But in the cave, a lot of, so a lot of his films, most of them actually, were filmed here until he moved to Canada, of course. And yeah.
So Day of the Dead, we as the audience, we are, because of the beginning of the movie, I'm assuming that's where you said the Florida scenes were shot. We are to believe that the whole movie takes place in Florida. Is that accurate?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did it feel like for you being the only woman in a male-dominated cast? Was it awkward? Did they all make you feel at home? I mean,
oh, sure. George's sets are fantastic. I mean, you feel like part of this team of people. There were a lot of women on the sets, just not in the movie,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
Except the zombies. So, actually, Cletus and Barbara were Barbara Anderson and Cletus Anderson, the set design and the costume design. They were my professors at Carnegie Mellon. So we do crew for the plays and stuff, and I'd always get to sew the costumes or whatever. But they were my professors. There were all these wonderful family connections. It felt like, just he had such a. Oh, the crew was fantastic. The makeup guys, Tom and of course Greg now, who's so famous.
We're gonna get to them in a second. Yeah, trust me. Now. Joseph Pilato, who did great portraying Rhodes, the character that everybody hated, okay? Sadly, he passed away several years ago. A very sad thing. In the movie, he got a very gruesome death in the movie. Do you feel his character got the death that he deserved in the movie?
Yes. Of course. Even though he was still talking with his neck was like half off, we still imitate Joe in some of the scenes because he just always made me laugh. I mean, I would break tape sometimes because he was just, he's a very good actor. He was a really good theater actor, and, but we would get so silly after a while, especially when we shot the scene in that big conference room. Oh my God, it took like 5 days to shoot that.
Really?
And we were getting punchy, and because I'm tall, I'm like 5'9", and Joe was a little bit shorter. He had to wear these shoes that had these lifts in it. And I kept on laughing because he was clomping around acting tough, but he did such a good job. He was such a good actor.
Absolutely. He was amazing in that movie. Now, yeah. Day of the Dead has one of the most memorable massacres by zombies at the end of it. Okay, just absolute mayhem. Your character was in the tunnels, so your character did not get to witness while all the others left behind were being eaten alive, literally. But during filming, did you get to see Tom Savini at work doing all that makeup, getting all the preparation? What was that like?
Fantastic. I wanted to hang with those guys. They were funny, George was funny too, but we were very serious trying to get the shot. It was on film and they had to rush it. It was there was of course, a big serious factor there, but they had so much fun in there, and I was like jealous. I wanted to go goof around with them, because they were funny and be one of the boys. I don't know. Maybe that's why I worked in the movie, but they were.
I totally agree with you. It's just like, I want to see that. Now, as you mentioned, Greg Nicotero did have a part in the movie. His head ended up on top of a table. Right. 1980s was really sort of like the start of Greg Nicotero's career back then. Is there anything that he did on that set that he would be embarrassed got out today? That did he do any?
Let me think.
He's so phenomenally great with his makeup company now. Of course, the executive producer of the Walking Dead series, Creep Show. He's got his own show. You can't feel anything but just happiness for what he's achieved.
Sure. He's a good friend, and he was 19, I think, on the set of Day, and I was in my early 30s, and I loved him because he was such a good kid, and very bright and eager to learn, and Tom really taught him a lot, and they're best of friends now.
I had them both on the show together.
I saw that. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Well, that I live in a place called Squirrel Hill, and Tom lives in a place called the Italian neighborhood? Oh my God, Bloomfield.
Okay.
And it's right down. I could walk to his house pretty much. Yeah. So we're all honestly like family. I'm glad to be back in Pittsburgh. I raised my kids here. I came back when I shot Day. We got a sense of what it was like to have both sets of grandparents. We only had one day off, but my daughter was with me, able to be with me, so my husband, who happened to be from Pittsburgh, I met him in New York. He was able to come into Pittsburgh, and we got to see what it was like to have both sets of grandparents. And it was I was 4 years later after my son was born that we decided to come back here. And my agent said, "Laurie, you're never going to be able to work again if you go back to Pittsburgh." And at that point, it was a choice that I made because I wanted to be there and raise my kids, and I knew how great Pittsburgh was. And I did some theater here at the City Theater. But I have many other interests too, and I had a great career up until that point.
Yeah, I mean, George Romero put Pittsburgh on the movie making map forever. Forever and
Right.
ever and ever. Did he give you any kind of leeway when it came down to the shooting your scenes on Day of the Dead, maybe ad-libbing here or there, or you trying to make the character more to what you felt Sarah should be?
Yeah, it was so collaborative, and George was always open to our ideas, all the actors' ideas. It was a communal creation, of course, led by him and masterminded by him, and he was the main genius on the sets. But he also gave us a voice. So after we would shoot, sometimes we would talk about the characters. Everybody would meet with George and say, well, do you think it's going right this way? And also we used to sit in on the dailies. That's when, like I said, it was shot on film, so it would be shipped off to New York and processed and come back, and we could sit and watch the dailies and sort of see how the character was going. He was very open to us being there and discussing the character, and it was George was always open. Yeah, some of it was not ad-libbed. I mean, I was always, see, that's the other thing. I was trained never change a writer's words. You just don't do that. But George, I was just a little intimidated to do that. But after a while, you get to know each other so well. He was very open to that.
Now, Tom Savini and obviously Greg Nicotero have went on to direct. Tom Savini directed the remake of Night of the Living Dead back in 1990. Do you think both of them, in your opinion, Greg Nicotero, obviously big-time executive producer now, director, you think if you were to guess, you think their biggest inspiration was George Romero?
Oh my God, without a doubt. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I have to tell you something though. My dad, believe it or not, was an inspiration to George and to Tom. Tom used to come up to my dad's show and dress like a vampire, to be on the show.
That sounds just so much like him.
It is. It's really true. I have pictures. It's so funny. And Greg, like I said, he just loved my dad. And George came to visit my dad when he died 5 years ago this July. He knew he was going to die, and he got all these letters from all over the world. I asked for the people to say how they appreciated him. So he got millions, just so many. I cannot tell you. And George came to visit my dad a week before he died. It was great. Mm-hmm.
So I want everybody to be clear on this. Your dad was the person that we saw on TV doing the newscast in Night of the Living Dead.
Right. He is Bill Cardill. There are a couple of news people, but my dad was the reporter on the scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is so cool. I mean, it's just amazing. You guys, not only on the set, but outside with Greg, yourself, Tom, you guys are really a family that are bonded for life. And
when Joe died, and now Gary died. Gary, who played Steele, he just died of ALS. I mean, I saw him. I just want to cry. He was such a close friend. We all became very close to this day.
Even though he played like a hard ass, he looked like a big teddy bear.
And he was a gentle giant. He used to play for the Saints.
Really?
He broke his, and he severed his Achilles heel or tendon. So he was out. But that's how big he was and handsome.
Was that during filming?
No, it was way before that.
Way before. Okay.
Yeah.
36 years later now from the movie, and has its place in film history. Do you get recognized still if you go to certain places? Hey, aren't you Sarah from Day of the Dead? Uh,
No, I don't. I don't. No,
was
it's
there
okay.
any point, like late
No,
80s and the 90s, you just incognito, people just
it,
did not?
no. I was happy. I mean, I never was in it for, I didn't. I grew up with my dad being famous in Pittsburgh, which is like being famous in the world because everybody would stop us and wherever we would eat dinner and, the whole thing. And it was never anything that attracted me. Um, to have that recognition for the work is which is wonderful now, for me to have. But as far as fame, I was on a soap opera. I got more fame on that. People would come up to me about that when I was younger. Winter Austin, who was an ex porno queen with a heart of gold.
Looking at your career timeline, you're still active in like making shorts and stuff, but there's a big gap between 98 and 2011. Did you just make a conscious decision to just leave acting behind and then you're like, let me go back to it? What was the what was that big break for?
Well, I had to be in New York to have I mean, my career was starting to get bigger and it's full time. I mean, you are working on your work and getting work constantly. You have to be either in New York or LA at that time. And my children, like I said, really, it was important to me that they be here. And it wasn't so easy for a woman to be in the business. It was all or nothing. They didn't care. I saw my agent a week after I had a cesarean, and he said, "Oh, you look so tired." I said, "Well, I did have a baby. Just we don't want to hear about you being pregnant." It was not very good. And I just, honestly, what happened too was that I came back to Pittsburgh and had to deal with some things that I had been have been coming up for me. I was horribly abused by my uncle, who was a doctor during my childhood, and I wrote a book about it. It's called "I'm Gonna Tell: An Offbeat Tale of Survival." So I started writing and dealing with that, which is a long story that was very convoluted, and I was working with the FBI. My uncle was a doctor, and it was bad,
Wow.
but I had to deal with that stuff. Yeah, so I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have done that work without, being in the industry. It was just I wouldn't have had the time nor the patience and the privilege. Really,
Well,
I had great people that helped me.
kudos to you for speaking up, writing the book. I mean, double kudos. That's awesome that you did that, and the courage to write it into a book. That has, I mean, for me, that's nothing but respect right there. So, I mean, thank you for sharing your story with that. Now, uh, let's talk about the remake of Day of the Dead. Okay, came out in the 2000s. I'm going to give you my personal opinion. I did not like the movie. Okay, I did not like the movie having the title Day of the Dead. The only similarities for me were the characters' names. Everything else, yeah, in the military aspect, sure, but everything else was just completely different. Did you get a chance to ever watch the remake of Day of the Dead?
No, I didn't, and I have great respect for. I think it was Mena Suvari that played the part.
Yes,
Was it? Yeah,
yes.
well, she's like phenomenal. But I heard that it had nothing to do with it,
Hmm.
and I don't want to put anybody down, but I think the people that owned it, they didn't care about the quality. They just want, of course, it's to make money,
Yeah,
and so it hadn't, from what I hear, it just had nothing to do with it. There's never been, I think, an honest attempt to make it with quality that it had, which is okay. It's not a bad thing. It's just not a remake.
it's not.
You
It's
know,
not. And I tell everybody the remake of Day of the Dead, just the character names and a little bit of the military aspect, it has nothing else to do with the original movie. And I'm all for doing a reboot of a movie and making it your own. But if that movie had a different title of besides Day of the Dead, it would have been okay. But we're sitting here watching Day of the Dead remake, looking for some similarities to the original with these filmmakers' take on it, and it just never came to fruition. And I think that's why a lot of people felt very disappointed. And that goes in direct opposition to the remake of Dawn of the Dead, which came out in 2004, which was a fabulous remake. It was
Right.
just absolutely fabulous. So yeah, if you haven't
Yeah.
seen it, I mean, it's not a
Yeah, go
priority.
see. Yeah, go see the original. And I mean, if you really want to study it, I think that to study George's work, it's worth seeing Day of the Dead. They're making a TV show out of it now, I heard. So that'll be interesting because I hear it not doesn't have much to do with it, but they got a lot of flack from the fans, and maybe they're making it more.
Yeah, you see,
Um,
when it comes to classics like Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, that title means a lot to the true diehard fans. So
right,
you
right.
got to be very careful as a filmmaker if you're going to use the title. And there's a big fan base, devoted fan base, and if they don't see, they're watching it to see your spin on the old story and maybe how much you've changed it around. But if it goes too far off course, that's when you get the negative pushback and so on.
Right.
How much do you?
I want.
Oh, go on. No.
I really thought it would be interesting. I often talk to George about why don't you take these last three characters? We're all still alive, the three actors. So wouldn't it be interesting to see, to make that, to see what happened to them? I thought that would have been interesting. Yeah, but I don't know. I guess George didn't. But I think it would be interesting.
I would have too. I mean, what happens? I mean, like I said, we're left to presume you guys are on that island and you live out the rest of your days in peace. The world is gone. The world has, civilization has fallen and there's no bringing it back, which is like in opposition. I don't know if you watch The Walking Dead. The whole
Mhm.
premise of The Walking Dead is them trying to rebuild civilization, which
Right.
seems like it's a really steep uphill battle for them. How that turns out, we're still,
Right.
left to be seen. Now, how much of Laurie is in the character of Sarah of Day of the Dead?
I would say what I had to go through as a kid and um, what I had to face and fight for and work with the FBI and all this stuff. I discovered that there was a lot of me in, or Sarah in me, or me and Sarah. You don't know your strength until you have to really, kind of break down and rebuild yourself and face these horrible things. You have to face them, and then hopefully you can change people's attitudes and educate people. And as I said, my photography, a lot of it is in your face kind of stuff. And so I think that there always was a lot because I had to survive that stuff as a kid, and there was a part of me that was able to do that. My psyche was able to compartmentalize that aspect of my life. And so there was a certain strength that I had, I think. And also in my training, there's this, the show must go on, as we were talking earlier, that I was really very disciplined actor and really took the craft very seriously. And so, yes, I think there's a lot of me in that character. I'm a little goofier. I have a lot of really black humor, and I love to laugh. And I wanted to be with the boys and play with them. And my kids were just all jagoffs, as we call in Pittsburgh. We're all jagoffs. My husband's a jagoff, and my son, he produced The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan
Really?
10 parts. Yeah, he was the main producer on that. Now
That's
he's
so cool.
yeah, he's Jake Rogal is his name.
You
And my
must
daughter,
be you must be so proud.
I am. He already has 2 Emmys. He's like 34.
Wow. Wow.
Oh,
Now
and my daughter, she's so talented too. Jeez, oh man.
well, talent runs
Yeah,
in the family, absolutely. You know,
we're all like carnival people.
you mentioning the idea of George maybe going back to see what the remaining three of the Day of the Dead were up to. One of our reviewers just posed this question, and it's very interesting. You know, Greg is heavily involved, obviously, as an executive producer in The Walking Dead. Now, putting the whole rights issues of the movies and shows aside for a second, if Greg Nicotero were to approach you and say, you know what, wouldn't it be great if we bring those three survivors in some way, some fashion from Day of the Dead into the Walking Dead storyline? Would you do that?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, I would love Greg. I would do. You know, I said to him, "Why don't you make a movie about these last three characters?" You know, I said, "Go ahead, do it. It's interesting." You know, it does. It would be very. It could be. I mean, I always wanted to play Sarah like. This is funny because I said to George in the beginning, I said, "George, it would be great if I could like." She has her like a missing tooth and her hair, like sort of like Road Warrior. Yeah. You know. That her hair was all, she was really gritty like that. He said, Laurie, that's a different kind of movie, darling. so, you know, but it would be fun to play, you know, to really make it gritty and interesting and dark. And
I think it's a great idea. And I didn't even think of it until you mentioned, you know, let's see what these characters are up to 36 years later.
Yeah, they're right, very tied up.
Who were your biggest influences in the industry when you know, well, first of all, when did you realize, at what age did you really, you said you went to Carnegie, but when did it really hit you that acting is what you wanted to pursue in life?
Well, it's funny. I did, when I was 14, I started working, doing runway modeling. Because I was tall and thin, and that's what I did. I started working very young, and it was an interesting profession, but it wasn't enough for me. It felt kind of there. I felt like I took on the clothes, and I wanted to do a certain thing, and there was more I felt inside me that I wanted to express. And honest to God, it was my senior class play in my senior year. I was on stage and I made the audience laugh, and I thought, this is great. And then I heard that Carnegie Mellon is like one of the best schools in theater, you know, in the country, that and Juilliard. And so I auditioned and I got in, and I was shocked, but I did. And then they graduated 11 kids. That's how rigorous it was. And, you know, I loved it. I think because of my childhood, and I was able to, I'm kind of a shy person, but with acting, I could really become something, a character, and bring all of these emotions that I felt in my heart to the stage. And I learned in a way how to feel on stage, really, to become a whole person, as sick as that may sound. It was a very, you know, it was a way to sublimate my trauma.
It was a great, well, and what you're saying, it was your way of coping. It was a great outlet for you.
Right.
Almost every guest that I've had on has had stage experience, started out on stage. For us people that are not actors, for me personally, I think it's just absolutely terrifying to be in front of on stage in front of a live audience. But almost every actor that I've spoken to, they say that is where like their big passion lies. And is that true for you as well?
Oh, sure, yeah. And the thing is that you are so prepared to perform on stage when the play opens, that you are that character. Mm-hmm. If you ask me to go up and talk in front of a lot of people, I'm terrified. I'm terrified. But to be prepared in a character that you've worked on for the many weeks of rehearsal, which is the most wonderful part of it all anyway, because you're so creative, you know, and trying these different things out. And so that was, it was wonderful. It was very hard to give up. I didn't realize how much of my identity was wrapped up in it, how much of my heart and creativity was wrapped up. I was a little bit tired. I started working at 14. I left New York and I was about 35 years old and continued theater here, but, not the big career. And, I did a lot of, I really did get to do a lot. And so I'm grateful. Maybe I wasn't famous, and that's okay.
No, hey, you know what? To true horror fans, you are famous.
Oh.
It's funny when you talk about that stage and the whole live issue. When it comes to my show, people ask, "Oh, so your show is actually live?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Dead Talk Live." For me, I could not imagine not doing this show live because I think we are our own worst critics. And if I had to do this show where I had to edit it afterwards, I would never be satisfied.
Right.
At least live, there's no do-overs. It's done. You can't put the cat back in the bag. So personally for me, it's what makes me feel comfortable. And that's why I love doing live shows where I don't have to worry. If I do something wrong, if I screw up, oh well, it's out there for the world to see. There's no taking it back.
Yeah, wonderful. That's so lovely because you're really giving of yourself to everybody.
Thank you.
You're hanging out as vulnerable as you can be and, creating with the guest. And isn't that's a high calling?
Absolutely. I love doing this. I love doing this. Now, let's get to your interaction with the character of Miguel on Day of the Dead, Anthony DeLeo Jr. You guys had great chemistry. I remember I watched Day of the Dead as a kid. When it came out in 85, I was 11 years old. I was born in 74. And I watched it dozens and dozens of times growing up. I cannot even tell you how many times I've seen Day of the Dead. And maybe it's because I was young. Throughout the majority of the movie, I really could not be sure if Sarah and Miguel were actually in a relationship or not. There was never that moment where you guys, shared an intimate moment. Was that done on purpose to keep the audience guessing? Or were the two characters just really trying to keep it a secret?
No, I think that she, at that point, when the movie, is in progress, she's just she does feel sorry for him and kind of pities him at that point, I think. And she loved him at one time. I think that at one time they were great lovers and had a wonderful relationship. But, everything got to him, and she was, a little bit stronger, and there was not that sexual tension in there at all.
Yeah.
If there's any sexual tension, it's between Rhodes and her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's that undertone there. In the beginning opening sequence where we see the dream sequence of you in that room and the hands coming through the wall, is it true that wall fell on you during filming?
Yeah. Yes, it's true.
I hope it wasn't made out of anything heavy.
No, it wasn't. It was like a styrofoam. The wall itself, when I go up to the wall and put my hand on, there's a real room. When I'm sitting there, there was a real room with concrete walls it was a square room and we filmed in there. But then, of course, we went aside and they made the styrofoam. It was styrofoam, kind of a heavy styrofoam.
So when this is 1980s, no CGI really existed.
No.
So I assumed the wall was there. Behind it, there were dozens of people, and they just boom, popped their hands right through that wall.
Yeah, and the force. I don't know why. It makes sense. Of course, it would fall on me. But it was hysterical. And my husband's hands were always protecting my breasts. Yeah, so they had to build that again. The other thing was the chopping of the arm. That that was a disaster the first time we did it too.
What happened?
Well, Tim, Anthony, his arm was buried. Poor guy. He was on that ground, that wet ground, and it was buried underneath him, his real arm. So it was deep in there, and they made the arm out of something that the second arm was made out of wax, so it worked. But the first time, I don't know what it was made out of, but I went and I chopped it and it just bounced right off. It bounced right off. So you have this it's like The Wall. You have this really serious moment, and everybody, and then that happens. Everybody starts laughing, and yeah. So yeah. So
I just have this image of you trying to chop that arm off, and the machete, the fake prop. I hope it's a prop machete, coming back and whacking you back in the face.
Pretty much, pretty much.
Oh my God, that's hysterical.
And also there were fake bats. Well, there were so many bats in that cave, but we had to use fake bats in the scenes. They had these little wires and they go flying. Sometimes the bat sometimes the bat would get stuck and it would just sort of like swing. Yeah, but there were real bats, but we didn't use those.
It sounded like so much fun being on that set. Is it true that the guts and the intestines that Tom used for the special effects were actual real pig intestines that Tom brought in and whatnot from a slaughterhouse?
Yes, and they were left in a container that was supposed to be refrigerated somehow. I don't know the whole story exactly, but they rotted in there. So when they did the scene, they were rotten and they smelled so bad. Everybody was gagging, and Joe had like stuff stuck up his nose. It was so bad. They were throwing up on the side. That's how bad it was.
Oh
yeah.
God, I can imagine the stink. Doing both TV and film, which did you find more enjoyable?
Oh, film. Yeah. There's more time. You get close to everybody. TV is like, okay, you do it and they say, okay, next scene. You don't even get to explore it or anything. It's just like, oh, I didn't like that take. But no, it doesn't matter. You go on,
Yeah.
The thing about the soap operas at the time, they were filmed as if they were live. So we worked all day, and then when we would film it, in the studio, there would be like 3 big cameras filming it, and it would go like it was live. They would shoot it, okay, commercial break, and then we just take a break, and then it would go right into the scene. So they would just move. It was like in a circle, the sets,
Yeah.
So that was shot differently, but like nighttime television, that it was done on film. A lot of that was pretty quick. I did do a wonderful show called Parole. It was the Police did the music for it. Can you imagine?
Ooh, Sting.
It was the Police at that time, and it was a Stigwood production, and it was a CBS movie, and Ellen Barkin was in it, and I was a flautist for the Boston Symphony, and my husband was James Naughton, who was a parole officer. The name of the movie was Parole. It played a lot as a movie, but it was supposed to be a series.
Mm-hmm.
And when they tested it, this too was ahead of its time. They tested it. They said, audiences don't want to see con of the week, crime of the week. That's like, oh my God. We were ahead of our time then too.
Yeah, things have changed. We are almost out of time. I do want to ask you a final question. You were in an episode of one of my favorite shows growing up, and that's Tales from the Dark Side. Okay?
Oh.
I believe you played a character, her name was Florence Bravo, who suffered a mental break. What was your experience like on Tales from the Dark Side?
That was a wonderful shoot. I really enjoyed that. That was that character was a very interesting character because you don't know whether she really saw ghosts or she's had So it was a meaty role also. I really enjoyed playing that character. That was a wonderful experience.
Another example of how even back then, playing with horror anthologies and how big horror anthologies are becoming today.
I know.
They were it just goes to show you all the people back then that were real visionaries and foresaw what was coming. And today, I mean, horror anthologies are popping up left and right.
I was just lovely. I was on The Equalizer too. That I see now as a show again.
Yeah.
British gentleman. I had a guest starring role on that one episode, but it was cool.
Absolutely. Looking back on your career, do you have any regrets?
Oh gosh, I guess everybody has some regrets. Sometimes I would. I think sometimes I sabotaged some of my auditions that I didn't want, and I don't know. Yeah, I regret that kind of stuff because I didn't want to move to California or something, and it was a really good part. I mean, I was just goofy, but I don't regret. No, my kids are such great kids. I have a wonderful family filled with love and joy and laughter. So heartache too, sometimes.
I
But
have three teenagers.
oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, you know, when people ask me, wouldn't you want to be 20 again? I would like, the only way I would be 20 again is if I can have the wisdom of being 46
Oh, I know.
back at 20. Otherwise,
I
I do not want to go through that again.
no, I love the wisdom at my age, which is old too, older, much older. But you know what? I would act again. I mean, I would do things. I will. I mean, people come to me with projects, and if I'm interested, I'll do them. I like to help students out with their student films, and I love, if the part is interesting or,
The
you don't
yeah,
lose your ability. You
yeah.
don't lose your
No,
ability.
no. Almost every actor I've had on here saying that the thought of retirement never even crosses their mind. Robert Joy once told me that the thought of retiring from acting is like asking somebody to stop breathing. Uh,
Exactly. No.
and you don't have to
I,
be in front of the screen to
mm-mm.
contribute. You can contribute to be a mentor and do so many other beautiful things in the industry.
Oh yeah, I love to talk to students, and yeah, I like to teach. All that. It's
Absolutely.
yeah, and give back. I like to give back, and I love meeting the fans. They're so wonderful and kind and interesting. And thank you for having me today. This was great.
Absolutely. This hour just flew by. Lori, you're incredible. Thank you so much for being here. My
You are
executive producer, who is also my brother, wanted me to say a very special thank you from him as well. He is my brother, 9 years older than me. So when Day of the Dead came out, he was much older and appreciated it. And he grew up on with horror. And him being a horror fan is why I became a horror fan. You know, the little brother wanting to be the big brother.
right. That's wonderful.
And
Oh, tell them thank you.
I will,
Yeah.
I will. Thank you so much. Any last thoughts you want to share with the viewers?
Oh, just stay scared, as George would say.
Absolutely. Laurie, thank you so much again for being on. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been a fascinating interview. Stay safe. And on behalf of Laurie and myself, guys, George would say his say, I say stay walking. Good night, everybody.